Welcome everyone to this very important event on bringing all of our multi-faith leaders together for reconciliation, the voice. This event is in celebration also of the World Interfaith Harmony Week, which is the first week of February, but we celebrate it any time in February. And this event was first proposed by His Majesty King Abdullah II of Jordan back in 2010 at the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York, and it was later accepted without a vote. So each year since, that was in September of 2010, since 2011, each year, the Interfaith Centre of Melbourne, along with many other groups here, has held an event in Melbourne. So I'm going to invite Auntie Helen Bernads, who will come to do an acknowledgement of country for us. Thank you, Auntie Helen.
Thank you. I cannot do a welcome to country because I am not from Victoria or the Kulin Nations. I do an acknowledgement to country. My tribal lands is up in North Queensland, and I am a Birri-Gubba woman from the Bindle group, and I'm also directly related, and still am, into the Cherbourg Aboriginal Mission. I have been down here in Victoria for over 52 years, where the Kulin Nations have looked after me. And they have given me permission to do acknowledgement to country. So relax into it now as I will give you these words. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of where the Melbourne Town Hall stands and the Wurundjeri people, and the other custodians of this land also. I respectfully give them my love and attention, and I acknowledge the elders, their elders past and present, and also what we have here is the emerging leaders, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders, the young ones. I'd like to acknowledge them also, and I put it out there that also if you will give them your blessing too. So thank you, brothers and sisters. It's going to be a great evening, and I look forward to later, if you want access to me, to be able to sit with me, and we'll have some time together. Thank you. Enjoy yourself now.
Thank you, Auntie Helen. I'm delighted to say that we have the Deputy Lord Mayor with us this afternoon, Councillor Nicholas Rees. We're very glad that you are here, and we also thank the City of Melbourne for providing this beautiful room for this event. And also I'd like to acknowledge Reverend Sandy Boyce from the Executive Director of the Victorian Council of Churches, and who was also a supporter of this event. So we thank you very much indeed. And now it gives me great pleasure to invite the Deputy Lord Mayor, Councillor Nicholas Rees, to the microphone to say a few words to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and I must admit that I was not expecting to be called to the lectern so early in this proceeding, in this event, so forgive me if all my thoughts are not as fully formed as they would normally be. But can I begin by saying Wominjenka, everybody. My name is Nicholas Rees, and it's an absolute honour for me to be joining you here today. I don't take I do not take it lightly, the privilege that is extended to me to speak at an event like this with so many of our faith leaders here, and also as a white fella talking about the issues that we will be discussing. I would also like to thank Auntie Helen for that wonderful acknowledgement of country. And I would like to add to her words by saying, Wamanjenka, Marembik Burundap, Warunjuri Willem U, Liwik U Kulin, Yalimbo Ba Yiramboy, which in the Woiwurrung language of the Wurundjeri people means I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the people of the Eastern Kulin, and pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. I've set myself a personal challenge to try and learn some of the local language of the area which the City of Melbourne governs. At the time of European invasion of Australia, there was over 230 languages spoken on this continent. Since then, over 100 have become extinct. A further 100 are bordering on extinct, and just 30 are spoken with any across enough generations to be not classified as highly endangered. So even just a few words, I think, is an important nod to the oldest continuous civilization on Earth. At the City of Melbourne, we acknowledge the unbroken connection of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, but also the Bunwurrung, the Dja Dja Wurrung, the Tajarong, the Wadawurrung peoples have to this place, and we acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I also want to acknowledge all the good people who have turned out tonight for this important event. At the City of Melbourne, we have made a commitment to fully support reconciliation in this country, and we have done that through our Reconciliation Action Plan, which we're very pleased to say was the first to be endorsed by Reconciliation Australia. I think we would all accept that this nation is on a reconciliation journey, and I've got to say I think the Uluru Statement from the Heart maps out that journey better than any previous attempts that I'm aware of. Voice, truth, makarata and treaty, 3 critical steps for our nation. And as Deputy Lord Mayor, I want to put on the record my support for a First Nations voice. This is indeed a moment for Australia, one which our nation must rise to, one which our city, Melbourne, must rise to. I'm sure that there will be some people who say, don't vote for the voice because it's not good enough. Some people will say, don't vote for the voice because there's some detail that they are unclear on, or there's some detail that they disagree with. To the waverers, the nitpickers and the naysayers, I say, please consider the counterfactual. Please consider the alternative. Please consider what it will mean for Australia if the yes vote does not succeed. Please consider what it will mean for Australia if the no vote prevails. This would truly be a dark day for our country, and it will set back our reconciliation journey decades and decades. But I am an optimist, and I'm sure everybody here is as well. And I don't think that will happen. I think the good of the Australian people means that the yes vote will succeed and our nation will take a significant step forward. The good people who these faith leaders know in their churches, in their mosques, in their synagogues, in their places of worship. There are just too many good people out there for this endeavour to fail. The good people who I see on the streets and in the neighbourhoods of Melbourne, I know that when the time comes, they will vote yes. So let's come together and support the yes vote. History is calling us, and we will rise to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Auntie Helen, for your acknowledgement of country which we reciprocate from our hearts. I'd just like to offer three little reflections. One about the significance of this moment, which Nicholas has conveyed as well. One about the sheer beauty, the poetry of the statement of the heart. And the third about healing and what we've learned about healing. So, in terms of significance, like the more I think about it, I think this is the most significant moment of my entire life, this referendum. I think 70 odd years on this continent, I think this moment when our nation makes a decision about the voice is the most significant moment I have known. Everything I have learned comes together in telling me how significant this is. Everything I've tried to learn about healing, everything I've tried to learn about reconciliation, everything I've tried to learn about helping people be free to find their own voice, everything I've learned about the history. Helen spoke about moments that she recalled. I recall them too, like the statement of the heart says, in 1967 we were counted. In 2017, which is when this statement was first issued, we seek to be heard. I remember going on a bus with people from the Noongar tribe in Western Australia, invited to go on a journey of reconciliation with people of another tribe up around Warburton, far north in WA, just after the Royal Commission on the Stolen Children had been released. And listening, it was a complete eye-opener. Listening as people were recounting their own stories, literally their own family stories. I went as a bishop to northern New South Wales, and after carefully building trust with the local Bundjalung people, was invited to go and do prayers in places where there'd been massacres. Each of us brings something to this that tells us of the suffering, of the dispossession, and when we stop and take it in, that we are being issued this invitation is a work of such grace, such grace that we are being invited to say our yes. And bluntly speaking, what is at stake, as Nicholas said, is whether we're going to become a really wonderful nation or just another rather mediocre, miserable place of wasted opportunities. Like, is that stark what this involves? And for those of us who are people of faith and dear, dear friends of faith traditions here together, we know that the depths, the truth, the deepest truths of our traditions call us to be united in this. United really in a way that transcends the quality of unity that we've had hitherto. That's what we have to lift to, so that the nation hears, not just with the one voice, but with the one spirit. This has to be yes. We all have to say yes. 100% of the whole Australian population. That's what we're, in our faith traditions, seeking to bring into being. For me, as a disciple of Jesus, I've learned so much. And a wonderful First Nation elder spoke to me recently, and she said, summarising Jesus' teaching, love everyone, forgive everything. Boom. Kind of cut through. And then secondly, the poetry of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We gathered, coming from all points of the southern sky, to make this statement from the heart. If you want to distribute, Helen's going to distribute the statement. We invite you, it concludes, we invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. It's so beautiful, isn't it? We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the whole Australian people for a better future. Our wonderful singer-songwriter Paul Kelly put the Uluru Statement from the Heart in his anthology of the world's most wonderful poetry. So it's in here with Shakespeare. It's in here with things from sacred scripture. To every person there is a season. It's in here with Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Love Me for Love's Sake Through Love's Eternity. It's in here with John Henry Newman's Lead Kindly Light, that poetry hymn that was so beloved of Gandhi. It's here with the most wonderful poetry of the heart. Such is the beauty of the invitation. And it is, as Nicholas was saying, an invitation that will be nation building, should we all say yes. Remembering also poignantly from another great poet, Elie Wiesel, Auschwitz survivor, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, who said, "Indifference is the epitome of evil. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." So, the significance of it, the poetry of it, and the potential for deep healing in our land. In healing work, after harm, hurt, loss, there's always the choice. Reciprocate the cruelty, get into reciprocal vengeance, or try to forgive, try to heal. Continue the harm, try to heal. When the one or the ones hurt or harmed feel listened to, this is the experience of many of us, when people feel really, really listened to, the healing begins. A future begins for them that is more giving and forgiving. A future in which the choice can be in the healing direction and away from the other. I think it's broadly speaking true that very few people feel well listened to, but when we have been well listened to, we know what a wonderful gift it is. And coming to know the deep healing of good listening takes us a time to give it to everybody else. But when we do give it to people, then whatever might be fragmented about the narrative of their lives, the traumas, the losses, the pain of various episodes, it kind of can become clearer for them, and they can see the next steps that they might take. And many people on our continent need careful and patient and loving listening. In a way, Australia's like a big therapy centre, because it's full of people with fragmented narratives from all sorts of circumstances. Obviously, people that have come here fleeing, seeking refuge from after the Holocaust through to the recent people from Afghanistan and Ukraine, and also people fleeing domestic violence, particularly women and children, into places of shelter. And really, this is why this moment is so significant. The healing of our nation, which is now home to people from every land, has to start with listening to our First Nation people. If we get this right, if we say wholeheartedly yes to this possibility, then it can be a model for much else that's needed for our health and well-being on this island together. But for now, appreciating the significance, really we can but pause and feel really blessed that this moment has actually been entrusted to us, that our First Nation people have been kind enough to even ask us to say yes. And we can pause and think about all those other places on our planet where such a healing moment like this is simply impossible. Such is the endemic nature of the reciprocal harm. So, in conclusion, in our unity, complex as it is, but full of gratitude, heartfelt gratitude, and with, as these weeks go on, with soaring spirits, as more of us unify around the clear, passionate yes, we can see that this wonderful referendum is such a moment of grace. So, we must say yes. We must say yes, yes, amen, 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 may it be so, yes. Is that how you feel? Yes. Is that how you feel? Yes. Pardon? Is that how you feel? Yes.
Don't be fearful here. Don't be fearful of what our country is being asked to do. I am not a constitutional lawyer. I know others are saying we need more information about the framework of how this is going to be done. I don't agree with that. I agree totally. We need to see what the Australian people would like, and once we get the referendum through, which we will, the majority of Australian peoples would say yes, and within the majority of the 6 states of Australia, yes. Once we get what the will of Australia's people want, then we look at constitutionally how this is going to look. Our Prime Minister has an advisory group of constitutional lawyers and top-level advice from those who know how to do this. What's the use of going through all the nitty-gritty of stuff and the referendum doesn't go up? It's a waste of time. It's silly. First, all of us as Australian people need to go and do this referendum in a positive way. If you are wanting to know, and your family, it's already been said about the statement of the heart, How many times do Aboriginal people have to say, this is what we want? And it was done in 2017. I've got to read it to you guys. You have a copy in front of you. So in May 2017, 250 of the top Aboriginal leaders attended the First Nations Convention on the Constitution. I'm going to read out what it says. You follow it if you like in front of you. It stated clearly, we gathered at the 27th National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky to make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial. The sovereignty is a spiritual notion. The ancestral tie between the land or Mother Nature and that of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom remained attached thereto and must one day return thither to the united with our ancestors, and this link, this ownership, so you will know this ownership has never been ceded. Aboriginal people did not say you can come in and just take our lands. With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe the ancient sovereignty can shine through a further expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not innately a criminal people. Our children from their families have been disconnected. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth, as young as 10 years of age, languish in detention centres in obscene numbers. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is, and I honestly believe this is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish and they will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to this country. So the last two, they're calling for the establishment, as you can read, of a First Nations enshrined in the Constitution, and to seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations a truth-telling about our history. And that's what is important, a truth-telling. You need to know why Aboriginal people feel the way they do. You need to know, if you're not already educated, on the policies that were brought in and that Kevin Rudd apologised for the removal, taking our kids away, the removal of Aboriginal lands taken away, and Aboriginal people were put on missions and reserves. You need to understand why Aboriginal people, a lot of Aboriginal people do not know their culture, do not know their language, do not know where their mobs come from. Because on the missions and reserves, that was absolutely banned. I need you to be able to do your own research and find out here in Australia what has happened under a White Australia policy, and then all the other policies, government policies, that stripped away Aboriginal people's language, their culture, and to a point where they don't know who they are. I'll let you know. So if people want to know, well, what do Aboriginal people want, they get so much. How many times do we have to say it? Because you don't have to say it now, you've got the statement from the heart. This is what we're asking for. From a community perspective, yes, I work for Peninsula Health. I hold an executive position, but I also do a senior social work role also. I'm out in the community. So my patch, I can't speak for all Aboriginal people, but I'm here to just give you the information. In the southeast region, I'm an elder there. My job is to be out in the community. So out in the southeast region, so like from Hastings onwards, there are several big Aboriginal gathering places. So at Hastings we have Willamarang, where there is a lot of programs run for women's business, men's business, for the youth. There is a big program there for those who are coming out of prison to do community service down in the community. Next, I visit this place every week. We have what they call Bunjalwarra, which is a Koori or an Aboriginal youth drug and alcohol healing centre. So those young tackers who have made the wrong decisions and have ended up incarcerated, have ended up doing drugs, who have ended up homeless, that is a place, eventually, if they're lucky enough to get in, where they go there, and after a certain time, and with expert help, they come through that awful tunnel. A lot of those kids, their ages are ranged from 16 to 22. They don't know their culture. I sit with them and a male elder every week, and then we do the cultural bit there, and we've got other beautiful people coming in. The majority of the staff are great non-Aboriginal people, and they help the mob, those young kids. Next at Frankston, we have Narramar Jimbana, another big Aboriginal gathering place where a lot of good programs are held. Right from the little tackers, the babies and that, to men's and women's business, to the elder group. I'm involved there also. Yesterday I was out in the community with 100 Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, and it was a welcome to Bubba country, so the Aboriginal babies were welcomed into the Bunurong language and to the country. So they were painted up, they were smoked. There were 2 Aboriginal elders there. They were smoked, and their parents and the grandparents, a lot of non-Aboriginal grandparents, bless you, darling. And then they were given their certificates. It was the most beautiful, heart-rendering thing that I've ever taken place in. Approximately about 120. I'm out in the community, and when it is, I'm having yarn-ups with them about the referendum, all of them say yes. Please, yes. Because our children and the grannies, the grandchildren, we want them included in Australian culture and to be an Aussie, but to be proud of being an Aboriginal Australian. Only 2 minutes more, I worked in Queensland with Link Hump. So it was those Aboriginal people who didn't know their families, and through a process, documented evidence and that, trying to link them up again with their Aboriginal culture. A lot of people were institutionalised. Some of the reunions worked, some didn't. When there were no longer the Aboriginal parents or family there, then I was involved with the graveside reunions. The heartache of Aboriginal Australians trying to link up with their Aboriginal families. That apology that Kevin Rudd did on the 13th of February was so healing for a lot of Aboriginal people when he came forward and apologised. Now get this, what he apologised for was the policies of the Australian government. Look it up for yourself. You do your research, do the statement of the heart and then the research. That's what he apologised for, and I'm letting you know that was the start and the wheel of change for healing for a lot of Aboriginal people who kept that pain and that grief inside. Please spread the word that yes to the referendum, because I would like Australia to come to maturity and own up. Tell the truth. Again, what I said to you at the start, don't be fearful. Don't be fearful. Step forward. We need you to step forward. The majority of the Aussies have to say yes. And as I said, within the 6 states, the majority of the states, also the double majority, they must also say yes. Thanks heaps. And I look forward to, if you want later, have a bit of a yarn up, eh? Bye-bye.
Thank you, Di. And I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we meet on. I pay my respects to the elders, both past, present, and emerging. I always say this land has never been ceded, and this land will always belong to the First Nations people. And we, as migrants, are thankful for the warm welcome it has been extended to us. Thank you for the lovely information that you have provided, Auntie Helen, I think. I just want to touch on 2 aspects, I think, of the Uluru statement, which I thought was very relevant as multi-faith, multicultural communities going forward. It says, sorry, let me get to that. Sorry, my eyesight is not very good. It says, we seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish, they will walk in 2 worlds, and their cultures will be a gift to their country. Then it goes further. The last sentence I want to talk about was, Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia, and better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. That speaks to the heart of every faith-based community. That's what we believe in, justice and fair play. For us, we are all equal in the eyes of God. It's not who we are, what color we are, or where we came from. It's that. And to recognize the First Nations' pain and suffering and recognize in the Constitution is what we as community leaders and communities need to spread. For many of us who came from overseas, from different countries, whether it be in the 50s, 60s, like the Muslim community has a very big history with the First Nations people. It's over 400 years. They came here, they embraced the culture and took part with it. It is to recognize, and many people who came in the last century, in the last 100 years, even when I came way back in 92 to Australia, we were never told anything about the First Nations people. We heard about the English culture, we heard about what has been done in this country. We were never told. And my message to our community, and which you are doing, and on the ICV, we have on our board elder of the First Nation, Andrew Gardner. He's on the board, and he's also a Muslim, so he plays a very important role. We are telling our people, we are telling not only our people, but all communities and all nations, talk about the First Nation, educate our people, because the message that's out there, the negative message out there is, it is bad. And for many of these people, especially the first generation, third, second generation that's here, the elderly, they have never heard anything about the First Nation. They have no connection. It is our role to educate. And that's what we as Muslims will be doing. And I remember in Canberra, when I was in Canberra, Auntie Veronica mentioned this. Do not walk in front of us, do not walk behind us, but walk with us. And that is my message to not only the Muslim community, to everyone. I'm sorry I have to leave by 7 because I'm doing a big talk on COVID to a whole lot of people, because COVID is not going, it's still here. So I'm talking to an international forum on that. So I'll be leaving at 7, please excuse me. But again, we can do this. We can do this together with the First Nation in a very respectful manner. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. There's some famous line from the Jewish tradition, which is Dvarim sheyotzim min halev nichnasim min halev. Words that come from the heart enter other people's hearts. And as the speakers tonight have stood up here and read out words from the Uluru Statement of the Heart, I'm sure that has pierced our hearts and opened them, because those words come deep from First Nations people's hearts. And it's their mapping for all of us to come on a journey with them. And I thought I'll tell you some stories that have been passed down from my family. On one side, my grandfather is a Holocaust survivor. He came here to the lucky country after losing his mother, his father, his older sister and his younger brother during World War II, seeing the atrocities of the Holocaust. He came here with nothing, and he built up a family. But on my wife's side, my wife is 5th generation Aussie. Her great-great-great-grandfather, a man called Rabbi Moshe Zalman Feiglin, he settled in Shepparton and was instrumental to setting up the Jewish community. He was a religious Jew, came out in the late 1800s and settled in Shep. And the story is passed down from generations is that Rabbi Moshe Zalman Feiglin was revered in Shepparton. Not just because he was an orcharder and he did all right for himself, but because he paid the white fella and the black fella equal wage. This is in the late 1800s. As you see in the statement, in the Uluru Statement of the Heart, in 1967, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders only started to be counted. On my wife's side, her great-great-great-grandfather, Rabbi Moshe Zalman Feiglin, was inspired by his religion, by his Torah, and he thought to himself, and he guided his family along those principles. And it didn't matter who you were, or what background you came from, what race or what creed. When you worked on his orchard, you were paid equal share. And that's something that my family, and that when I tell my children, 6th generation Aussies, stemming from Rabbi Feiglin and his wife Leah, that's something that we as a family can be incredibly proud of. And on the flip side, as I mentioned, my grandfather survived Auschwitz and 5 other concentration camps, losing his entire family in the fires of the Holocaust in Europe. He was given every opportunity under the sun. He had to work for it. It wasn't easy, but he married my grandmother, and she should live and be well. He had 3 children, one of those my father. He worked on the train tracks and eventually opened up a factory, and the rest is history. But now in 2023, we as Australians are contemplating a yes vote, a no vote. How does that even make sense? There's something backwards about who we are as a people, as Australians. This should have happened years upon years ago. That on one side of my family and another side of my family, we have people that migrated, that made a life for themselves, and that interacted with First Nations people. But at the same time, I'm bewildered that this is even a debate. And the fact that we have members of federal parliament throwing shade on the vote, it's despicable. And what it's going to come down to is that each and every one of us being left empowered by what's happening in this room tonight and taking this inspiration, these words, what we've heard tonight, and speaking to our faith-based groups, whether it's in Mass, whether it's in synagogue, whether it's when you're listening to your preacher, to your imam, whether in that sacred place that you worship or outside when you're breaking bread and having a drink and seeing how you're going, and encouraging and educating the people around us that we must vote yes, because that, my friends, is the moral, just, and religious thing to do. Thank you for having me today.
So I'm going to offer a short Buddhist reflection, and Aho Maha Sukha, which means hooray, great happiness in Sanskrit. And I hope that we are on the verge of the great happiness of welcoming the Indigenous voice to Parliament. For too long, we have not listened to our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and laws have been enacted which deeply affect their lives and societies for which they were not consulted. I remember as a young person seeing that the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs was not an Aboriginal and being shocked by that. How could someone who is not Aboriginal be in charge of their affairs? But this was a typical arrangement for most of the past 120 years. It is only recently that the minister is Aboriginal. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the first Aboriginal minister
for Aboriginal or now Indigenous Affairs was Ken White in 2019. So we can see a structural problem here, the absence of a seat at the table. And we as Australians need there to be an Indigenous voice sitting at the table and contributing. This will benefit everyone. Those of us who are not Indigenous have much to learn from our Indigenous brothers and sisters. For example, they cared for this country sustainably for 60,000 years. They did not cause an ecological crisis or climate change. Moreover, they managed their affairs without the use of prisons or police. The Indigenous voice can give us all a different way of seeing. So often we who are not Indigenous see the landscape as capital and an asset, and a means by which resources can be extracted. But we don't see the landscape as the living, breathing, outward sign of another world, a dream time that is under the surface. We don't have time to look under the surface. We also don't have time to listen, deeply listen. And so often it is people who are structurally vulnerable, such as children, the elderly and the Indigenous, who are not listened to. We need a structural response to a structural problem, and the creation of a formal voice to Parliament will enable listening at the governmental level. And there's a phrase in this statement from the heart, which is really a very compelling statement. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. The torment of our powerlessness. Those of us who are not Indigenous may have difficulty even imagining such a thing, but it's a real experience. From a Buddhist perspective, our basic ethical principle is to do no harm, but more advanced practice is to help where possible. I am very happy to support the voice, and I believe it will help empower Indigenous people to regain some of their autonomy over their own affairs. Australia's scandal is its neglect of its Indigenous people, and things have to improve. We need the voice, and we need to recognise our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and we need to learn to listen, really deeply listen. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you and join with you, Auntie Helen, in acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I was delighted to hear in your introduction reference to Cherbourg. I was up at Melbourne on Christmas Eve for the 100th birthday celebration of Eva Collins, long-time resident of Cherbourg, whose family have done extraordinary work the length and breadth of Australia, family members in Nhulunbuy, Cairns, Cherbourg itself, who have really built so much of contemporary Aboriginal Australia. And to be there with them on Christmas Eve celebrating a centenary. I mean, when you think that the average Aboriginal life expectancy is still 15 years less or whatever, not many of your mob make it to 100, do they? And it really was a fabulous celebration. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to say a few words this evening, and I think the starting point should be the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I've always been struck, you've got a copy of it there with you, at the words which the drafters chose to put in italics. Just look at them. The torment of our powerlessness, the coming together after struggle, a rightful place. But then there's that third paragraph which Auntie Helen read out so beautifully, that sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land or Mother Nature and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have many Aboriginal friends who use those words like therefrom, thereto and thither, which got me doing a bit of research. Do you know where these words came from? It's an amazing story. They actually appear in two of the judgments of the High Court in the Mabo case in 1992. But they're a direct quote from a Lebanese judge, Judge Fouad Amoun, who was on the International Court of Justice in the Western Sahara case in 1975. He in turn was directly quoting the counsel who appeared for the country Zaire. And the counsel appearing for Zaire was a Congolese lawyer by the name of Bayona Barmea. I think particularly in terms of this interfaith context and intercultural context, how extraordinary that our first Australians gathered at Uluru took a formula of words which was invented by a Congolese lawyer appearing for Zaire, adopted by a Lebanese judge, and then taken up by two judges of the High Court of Australia in Mabo. That speaks to me of hope in terms of our intercultural and interreligious dialogue. I particularly commend the open letter which has been drafted and circulated by the leaders of Australia's major religious and ethno-religious organisations. And I want to draw attention to a few key sentences in that, where our faith leaders are calling upon us to draw upon our diverse traditions, beliefs and cultures to unite in support of this just cause. We call on our fellow Australians to consider the Voice proposal on its merits and for whatever information is needed to inform the community to be supplied promptly. And then they say, whatever our disagreements, let's work together to resolve them. The Voice referendum deserves cross-party cooperation. I'd go one step further and say it's even more urgent than that. If you look at the history of passing referendums in Australia, you have to have cross-party cooperation. And that's where we all still have a lot of work to do. So, just to speak a little about the problems confronting us there and what might be a way forward. I was very involved in the whole Mabo debate and native title back in 1993. Paul Keating, God love him, he used to have a wonderful phrase in the early stages of developing that Native Title Act. He used to say, good policy will be good politics. Now, I adapt that slightly in our present context and say good process will produce good policy, which can then lead to good politics, which can then lead to popular support. And the difficult phase we're in at the moment is trying to get the process right. And in doing that, I want to urge upon you as the interfaith community, I don't think we should be suspecting malice on people's part, but I think we need to do a lot more work in terms of speaking with our politicians of all types. Why do I say that? Put yourself first of all in Mr. Albanese's shoes. He becomes Prime Minister and he knows there have been 3 Liberal Prime Ministers in a row who said no to a voice in the Constitution. Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, Scott Morrison. What is he to do? He thought that one way to go, or the way to go, was to make the announcement at Gama of a formula of words that might be put in the Constitution. But he said it's not set in stone. These are words to get the conversation going. Where we're very much in a problem area at the moment is finding the process for that conversation. So then, put yourself in the shoes of Mr. Dutton. Now, I know in church circles, particularly those supportive of the Voice, there can be at times not much joy in talking about Mr. Dutton. I was leaving my church this evening and they said to me, "Will Mr. Dutton be at your meeting?" I said, "Well, I'm sure he's invited, but I don't know whether he'll be there." But for him, let's say there were people in the Liberal Party who had clear ideas about how a voice might be put into the Constitution. What presently is the process for dealing with that? Amending the Australian Constitution is very difficult, as Auntie Helen pointed out. I mean, you not only need a majority of people, you need a majority of people in 4 of the 6 states. Auntie Helen and I both come from Queensland. We know that it can be difficult in outer states, even though it might look quite secure in states like Victoria. And so there's always hard work to be done. Now, a couple of facts. The Labor Party has tried to amend the Australian Constitution 25 times. Do you know how often they failed? 24 times. I'll bet no one here voted in the successful Labor Party referendum. Why do I say that? Because you've got to be over 97 years of age to have voted in it. And what was it about? It was about child endowment and maternity allowances. The sort of thing which would be made available to everybody. The sort of thing, therefore, which is much easier to sell. This is something which is more difficult. And there are, yes, complex legal constitutional questions. That's why I wrote to Mr. Albanese, who he described me at the press club the other day as a friend of his, and I am. But I wrote to him 3 months after Garma and I said, now look, we now need a parliamentary process and we need bipartisan cooperation so as to get the words right. Now that's almost 4 months ago and it still hasn't happened. And I think we're now at a very difficult phase. I say that because the most successful Attorney General ever in amending our Constitution was the late Robert Ellicott, and I knew Bob quite well. In fact, when I was writing a book called No Small Change in 2015, I had quite a number of meetings with him. And I don't know whether you remember, but he was the Solicitor General for Australia in the first land rights case, Malurpum and Nabalco. And guess what? He was a strong Baptist. And the young 19-year-old translator for the Aboriginal Yolngu people was a fellow who'd been to Bible college. His name was Galarrwuy Yunupingu. And so when the case was being heard in Canberra, Bob went to Sir Edward Woodward from Victoria, who was appearing for the Aboriginal people, and said, would you mind if I invite the Aboriginal plaintiffs to come to the Baptist church on Sunday and then bring them back to my house for a barbecue? He said they didn't mind, and they all got together and they sang hymns, Baptist hymns, and traditional songs. And I gather there's still a recording of them. But Ellicott said this to me: the first rule of trying to amend the Australian Constitution is you've got to make sure there's no legal doubt or uncertainty in what you're putting forward. Why? Precisely as Auntie Helen said, the public doesn't want to hear about arguments that lawyers are having. You've got to get the words right. Now, very sadly, because we haven't had the parliamentary process, we still haven't got the words right. And so there are still arguments among the lawyers, and that causes white water, as I say, where last week people trying to launch the yes case, but there's still this argy-bargy about what should be the actual words to go into the Constitution. And once again I say, don't suspect malice on people's part, but we've got to try and create the path where Dutton, or at least those like Julie and Lisa in the Liberal Party who are wanting to get to yes, have a forum where they can work with the lawyers and get proper legal advice to work it through. It's frustrating even for me as a lawyer. We've already had 3 retired High Court judges making public statements. Robert French at one end, Ian Callanan at another, Ken Hayne in the middle. I mean, Who wants to go around punting on which High Court judge is right, let alone what previous High Court judge is right? So once we get the words right, which does require a parliamentary process, then we've got to be able to get out there and agitate for yes. Another point I want to make. I want to make one slight criticism, or maybe it's more than a slight criticism if I may, of what was decided at Uluru, and I'll explain why. A lot of people I meet around the country, including Aboriginal friends, say we would love to see some just straight out recognition of us, our history, our reality, our hopes and aspirations for the future. And if you know the history of this, it goes back to 1993 when the great Lowitja O'Donoghue was on the Republic Advisory Committee that Paul Keating set up, chaired by Malcolm Turnbull. And Lowitja proposed a preamble in the Constitution which would recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now that really was the debate and accepted way of proceeding in Australia up to at least 2007, when John Howard said that's what he would do. And a high point of it, I think, and I think maybe it was a graced opportunity that we've lost a bit, was in 2013. Julia Gillard, I think, showed great insight. She said as Prime Minister, look, all of this is going nowhere, it's getting messy, we need to at least put on the record what's common ground. And to give Tony Abbott his due, he was the leader of the opposition at the time, they came together and they passed unanimously through the Australian Parliament what was called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Peoples Recognition Act. The tragedy is most Australians don't even know about it nowadays. And I want to amend the words of that slightly to make a suggestion of, wouldn't it be great if there were an acknowledgement in our Constitution which something like this, at the beginning of the Australian Constitution, we, the people of Australia, recognise that the continent and the islands now known as Australia were first occupied by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Yes? Yes. We, the people of Australia, acknowledge the continuing relationship of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples with their traditional lands and waters. Yes? Yes. We, the people of Australia, acknowledge and respect the continuing cultures, languages and heritage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Yes. Sadly, at Uluru, it was decided, no, there's only one track we want to look at this stage, and that's the voice. Now, I can understand difficult political decisions have to be made, but part of the complexity for us all at the moment is trying to put in the voice basket all of those things that we want to recognise. And how do we do that in the Constitution? So that is simply to highlight that at the moment we've got a bit of mess there. We do need our Parliament to start the work to get the words right, and then once the words are right, then we've all got to be out there convincing those who are undecided. Make no mistake, there are three groups in Australia on this. There are those who'd vote yes, it wouldn't matter what was in the Constitution. There are those who will vote no, no matter what's in the Constitution. And there are those who are undecided, genuinely undecided. No point in going around calling them nasty names. What we've got to do is engage in respectful dialogue with them and bring them to yes. And if we do, then we can get a voice into the Constitution. Thank you.